In the summer, we had swamp coolers, I believe at the time. We didn't have air conditioning. You'd leave your windows and doors open all night just to get the fresh air in. You never worried about anybody coming and giving you problems. It was just lovely.
Welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, conversations with women who have found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 150. Find out more about the podcast at desertladydiaries.com and engage with the guests, with other listeners, or me on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries. With summer on the horizon, there's no better time to grab a t-shirt or tank top in the Desert Lady Diaries artist shop. But do it quick. Everything is 15% off until tomorrow, April 21st at 5 p.m. Central Time. So now's the time to shop. Thanks so much for supporting independent artists. To see and shop all the merch, go to desertladydiaries.threadless.com. And if you do your listening on Pandora, you'll now find the Desert Lady Diaries podcast there as well.
Darlene Morris was born in Omaha, Nebraska. Growing up with a dad who was a Marine, their family of 5 moved many times. Darlene's artistic mother always had art supplies in the car when they traveled. Working in many mediums, Darlene's work has been shown at the San Diego Watercolor Society, Carlsbad Oceanside Art League, and the Joshua Tree National Park Art Show and Fair, just to name a few. Her paintings in oil, watercolor, and acrylics are in private collections across the United States. Darlene is a member of the 29 Palms Artists Guild, a board member, and the gift shop manager. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, hello. I'm very glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. What was your first experience with any kind of desert?
Well, that was when we were crossing the country from one duty station to the other. We always headed for Nebraska and Iowa, where the family was, but we did drive through many different desert areas. We did stop to see a few, but we never spent a lot of time. What I remember is stopping for gas, food, and Native American gift shops, those teepees you see on the side of the road. But that's about the extent of it when I was a kid.
Right.
So my real first desert experience was with my first husband, who was also a Marine, and he was stationed in 29 Palms in 1967 after his tour in Vietnam. So we came up here and we were here for a year and a half. We left the area so he could go back to school and get a college degree. It took time to get used to the desert. I was from the coast. We were from Oceanside, San Diego area. And coming up here was so drastically different. The first 6 months, every weekend we would leave and go down to visit my family so we could get out of here. The next 6 months, we kind of got used to it. We only went every other weekend. And the nighttime and walking and the skies and everything were becoming appealing. And then I got pregnant, and my first daughter, the doctor said I couldn't go down the hill anymore. So we were here 6 months solid before we left the area. And my daughter was born at the base hospital in 1968. So that was a real introduction. I had never lived in the desert before that.
What was this place like in 1967?
What I remember is very few stop signs and only one traffic signal. That was on Adobe and the highway, and it was red all 4 corners, and it was quiet. In the summer, we had swamp coolers, I believe at the time. We didn't have air conditioning, and we were in a little apartment of like 4 units all strung together. You'd leave your windows and doors open all night just to get the fresh air in. You never worried about anybody coming and giving you problems. It was just lovely. I worked at the Security Pacific Bank for part of the time, and they're no longer here. They're gone. But it was close enough that I could walk from the apartment to work. I never had a lack of work because I was a bank teller and I could find work anywhere.
Yeah. So now you were here, your daughter was born. Did you leave the desert at some point then? Were you stationed elsewhere, or did a job take you elsewhere?
Yeah, my husband got out of the Marine Corps and we went to Kansas for 2 years so he could finish his college degree. No one else would have him because he was a really bad student when he was in there, but he did. He worked full time and he got his degree. And then we saw the ads that my mom sent from the San Diego Union newspaper, and we decided we needed to go down there so he could get a job. But that marriage lasted 9 years and then we separated. Mm-hmm. It was only a year though when I met my current husband, who was in the Navy. I just love those guys in uniform.
Apparently.
They just had some appeal, and they were more grown up. The high school guys didn't have any couth as far as I was concerned. But yeah, I met and married Peter, and he got out of the Navy. He wanted to make sure he kept me. And then he went back to college and he got a degree in counseling, marriage, family, and child counseling. And he began working as a counselor at Camp Pendleton. So he became a civilian Marine at that time. And we were there, let's see. Yeah, I'd have to ask him. I think it was about 10 years. And he got an offer to come up here to the base in 29 Palms to work up here in the counseling department. And so it was 2005 when we came up here. He worked as a counselor for a while and then became the head of the department, ran the counseling services. I'm sure glad he brought me.
I was going to say, had he been to this area before, or was this the first time he was seeing the high desert?
He hadn't been here, but when he was growing up, his father was working for the government, and they lived in Big Bend, Texas, National Park area. They lived in Grand Canyon, and he even went to Jamaica with his dad. He's a water resource management person. And so he had experience with other deserts, and he's taken me to see some of those now since we've been together 43 years, he said the other day. But this was the first time we'd actually lived in this desert. I'm loving it. I love the animals. I can look out my window and see these little ground squirrels and the birds.
It's constant distractions.
Coyotes, rabbits, lots of them.
Yeah.
And I got myself involved with the 29 Palms Art Gallery, and that keeps me very busy.
Right. So you had your daughter in 68. Is that your only child?
Yeah, my only one. He had two.
Oh, okay.
And I think that was the easiest way to get more kids, was just to adopt them in.
Smart lady.
Yeah. And they're wonderful. The son, Graham, is currently retired. He was working for the Park Service himself. He was a federal police officer. And then his daughter is working with a nature conservancy, and she and her husband are very busy in land management and conservation and all that. It's fabulous. And then my daughter lives in San Marcos, and she's currently a realtor. That's her third career, I think, now.
Yeah, we all go through that, I think. We think it's going to be one thing, but it always ends up being something else.
Yep.
So for you, when did your mom having those art supplies in the car obviously started you on a path really early to being very creative. So how did that take shape for you as you got older and decided that that was going to be a career for you besides the bank teller business?
Well, my mom was a painter. She did paint in oils. She had a few classes, but mainly it was self-taught. But with all the materials that she made sure we had, when I got into junior high, you could start having electives. So I took art and crafts and home ec all through high school. That's why I went to school, was for the fun stuff. I had to do the math and the history and all that, but I didn't care. It was the art that kept me going. I was telling my daughter, I still have artwork from high school.
Wow.
My senior year we studied Russia, and I have a hand-drawn map with India ink and watercolor still. The teacher wanted to keep as an example, and I couldn't leave it. I got through gym class. I was very bad at gymnastics, and I hurt my neck one time trying to do a silly somersault, and I got to draw how you do the movements and the different things that we're supposed to be doing, but I got to draw the pictures instead, and I got a grade.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just like, I couldn't do the physical stuff, but I could draw how to do it.
Right. So when you left high school and decided on a career trajectory, how did that work for you from an art perspective? Or was it later in life after the kids were a little grown and you're established maybe in a job that is not art related? Did you really start focusing on honing your art skills?
I never thought I would be a professional artist as such, but I knew it was always going to be part of my life. Yeah, I worked in banking for 19 years, and it wasn't creative at all, except at Halloween. We got to dress up. And then I put on my little French beret and brought in my paintbrushes and a couple of pictures to lay around. So everybody knew that's what I did. But it was always a side thing. I painted on the dining room table for a lot of years and never had a studio of such until actually I moved up here. And then one of the bedrooms is my quote studio. But it always had classes, whether it was adult ed or it was workshops through the San Diego Watercolor Society. I just had two really fun workshops via Zoom because I'm still a member of the Watercolor Society, and a lady was teaching how to do Procreate on an iPad.
What is
And
that?
so Procreate is a drawing program for your tablets.
Oh, okay.
And you use a digital pen. It's just as complicated, if not more, than Photoshop. And when I was going to school, I was doing a community college classes. I took them for the banking so I could do good there. And then I took them for art for myself. Then I took graphic design, and that changed things. I started working for a company that designed electrical connectors to put on the ends of all the cables we hook up. And I got to learn how to do graphic design work and got paid for it. And I decided, well, maybe I should go to school again and see what I'm doing. So I took Photoshop and AutoCAD for 2 years. So I did architectural drafting, and I thought I was going to do those big billboards that says, this is what the building will look like when it's done. All the building in California stopped when I got my certificate that said I knew what I was doing. I did drafting by hand for 2 years, and then I did it with AutoCAD. And so each time I got to the end of the program, the building died down. And the architects were all closing their offices and going home to work out of their bedrooms again or whatever. And I only worked for a couple of architects when all that happened, and then started doing the connector drawings. Are not very exciting, very detailed with the 0.001 exactness. And I wanted to draw houses. But I'm really glad I took the classes because I really enjoyed architecture a lot. And you can see it in my work because I'll find a bridge or stairs or something to fit in there. Perspective is not a problem because I had so much work with it. I can draw a really old barn, especially when it's falling down. It's real easy.
So you paint in oil and watercolor and acrylic. And each of those, I suppose, is its own discipline. Which one did you start with? And which one would you say is your favorite to work in?
I think watercolor was for the first thing, because even in high school, that's what you had, or tempera paint they had, which is a totally different feeling to it too. So watercolor, I think, was the easiest one. You could always have a little pan of the kids' watercolors hanging around. When I took an adult ed class with a really great teacher in San Diego, we did oils, and that was my first time of real oil paint with turpentine and thinners and all that kind of stuff, which I've gotten away from totally. But I really like acrylic paints. You can make them behave like oil paints. And they even designed a new one now. It's a slow drying acrylic, so it gives you the feeling of oils, but it still dries faster. When I was doing oil paints, I didn't have enough walls to prop them up on to dry. It took months for them to dry. And the first time I did an acrylic painting, I had a little sample set, probably 5 tubes of paint. And my teacher said we had to have an underpainting ready for the next class. Oils don't dry fast enough to do that. So I took a blank canvas and I used these first acrylic paints. They were like the first things they ever designed them. I don't know how good they were, but maybe the painting's still around. And I filled the canvas full of paint just with a palette knife and just kind of filled it all up. And I took it to class the next night. It was ready. And it turned into be a really nice painting. I still have it in my studio now hanging there. but it's a great way to start a piece. I like to play in the paint first and then figure out what it's going to grow up to be. And I go through photos and reference materials and I go, oh, that makes me remember when we were here, or that kind of reminds me of something. And then I figure out how to make it turn into that.
How long does that process usually take from the moment that you start it till you feel like it's done?
It varies. Sometimes they go fast and sometimes they're months, because you'll set it aside and work on something else for a while and then come back to it. I did a whole series of paintings. Geez, I think it was back in the 90s, and they were acrylic and collage, and it's a fabulous. I went to a workshop, learned how to do it, and it's just layers and layers of transparent acrylic paints, and you play in each layer. So you spatter stuff on them, you lift stuff out, and it's just like being a little kid playing with your finger paints again. But it takes a long time to work through this process. And then when you get to the point, you look at it and you go, this reminds me of, and you start developing it, and you put collage papers in it and you paint on top of those. And sometimes it's very realistic painting. You can paint on top of that. But it was a very fun process. And someday maybe I'll do it again, but I haven't. I did quite a few, and I've sold some of them too.
So you've been in a number of shows, and I think there are probably some people listening that are curious when they see a show has been juried. Can you explain what the jury process is?
Yes. It means you have to be good enough to get in. And the judge looks at all the pieces that people bring in to say, I want to be in the show. And he goes, you, nope, not you. And selects. Like the Watercolor Society might get 300 entries, and they're all from all over the world. Some of them are out of country. And then the juror sits there and views them all online. We used to actually send the files down, and they'd have a group of people sit there and go through them, but they select maybe 48 pictures out of all of those and say, these are the ones that are good enough, they're going to be in the show. And then after you're juried in, when the show is up, then someone selects the award winners, and then they go through and judge them for that purpose. And I've had a few awards. I got one hanging from third place from the 29 Palms annual member show. I don't know what year that was, but yeah, it's kind of fun to collect all your ribbons and hang them up if you can.
Well, so you don't have athletic trophies, you have artistic ribbons.
Yes. Oh, I like that thought. Yes, I do.
When is it that you started thinking, wow, I think I want to submit my work to a juried show?
I think when I was living in San Diego and I was a member of the Watercolor Society, they're a really fabulous group. They've been around a long, long time. And I was living close enough that I could actually drive down there and deliver paintings and pick them up again. Now, because of the COVID thing, they're actually doing online shows, and I didn't have anything current to put in, but a lot of things have changed because of this COVID thing. There's a lot more opportunities. You can submit art to lots of different places, and you don't have to deliver the artwork or ship it, which is very expensive.
Yeah. Did you learn how to run your art business on your own, or did you have any mentors that helped you? Because there's always the creative side of making everything, but then there's the business side of selling it, getting it in shows and doing all that, promoting yourself. How did that all come together for you?
I had some really wonderful teachers that would teach you the art and how to produce. I was hoping to have a class one time at one of the community colleges was advertising for the business side of art, and the class didn't go. They didn't have enough people to sign up, I guess. So it's all been sort of piecemeal here and there. At one point, I did have a website. It's still up, but it's going to be redone soon. There was a man who found my artwork on the San Diego Watercolor site, because as an artist, you could link your website to it. And he offered to rep me because he liked what he saw and he thought I'd be good, but it wasn't going to be free. I had to come up with some money to start it with. And I didn't have it.
Yeah.
So, but I've never been a driven artist. It's always been as it fit into every other thing I had going on. I know some people are so passionate about it that comes first in the day and everything else is left over. Mine seems to be backwards. The church, the gift shop, the gallery, the husband, all this other stuff happens first. And then if I have a little time left over, maybe. But I still managed to get a lot done. We had a young girl who was staying with us for a while, about 11 months. We were her foster parents, and she brought a friend in one day, and he said, walking in the front door, "This looks like a museum." And I thought, well, yeah, it does. Every wall is covered with art.
That's cool.
But we're running out of space. I have to really think about what I have to take down if I want to put something else up. So.
Right. Would you say because of growing up by the ocean, do you feel like you paint more desert, more ocean, or do neither of those factor into your work?
When I was living down there, I did go down to the beach, especially La Jolla, and I painted some down there on location. I never felt like I really got good at painting the ocean with the waves breaking and all that sort of thing. But, I was still learning. It was watercolors. I might have done differently if I was doing some other media, but I thought I'd missed that beach when I got up here, but I don't really. I still have the sand. I just don't have the water on the beach.
Exactly.
So, but I have painted on location out in our park, the Joshua Tree National Park, and my own backyard. I could sit out there and do a whole lot of work. We have a beautiful piece of property, and so it would be just change location in the yard and find another view.
Right. Do you think there's anything in particular about the desert that really comes through in your work?
The animals that make it work. I think I have a painting right now over in 29 Palms at the visitor center. It used to be the Chamber of Commerce Visitor Center. Now it's just the Visitor Center. And I have 2 paintings over there. And well, I took 2. There's one. When it sells, then I get to bring the other one. And it's called Desert Blush. It's a big one. It's 30 by 40 inches. And I try to make what I paint recognizable. So if someone's been there, they can say, oh, shoot, we walked down that trail. I know where that is. But I put a lizard in it. And he's sitting on a rock. And he posed for me out my kitchen window. So I took a picture of him, and he, how they raise up on their front legs, like doing push-ups or something.
Push-ups, yeah.
Yeah. And so there was this really great shadow underneath him and everything. And so he's living in that painting. It makes it, as far as I'm concerned. If I put my thumb over it and he's not there, it's not the same thing. You got to have the life in it.
Yeah, I like that.
I like putting raptors. I've got paintings with hawks flying or ravens flying, or there has to be something in there to make it live. The High Desert Museum, I missed that lecture they had, but it was the desert is not deserted. I think it was the title. And I think that's what people think a lot. It's empty. There's nothing going on there. Oh, is that wrong?
Totally.
Yep. My own daughter doesn't think she could live up here because there wasn't anything to do. I go, you have no idea. There's so much going on. You have to pick and choose. You can't do everything that there is.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But she's a city kid and she's going to stay down there. I'm grateful to leave down there and come home because it's not so crazy.
Right. A little quieter. When you get used to the quiet and the dark.
Yep.
In another place, it kind of, for me, I get a little overstimulated. All of it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity because my daughter has 2 girls and my first granddaughter has 2 girls now, and her husband's family is big. And when they get together, there's a lot of activity, kids running everywhere and lots of noise, happy, joyful noise, but still it's nice to come home and have quiet again.
Right. When you're accustomed to, I mean, I live by myself, so I don't really talk to anybody but myself. But you get used to just operating in quiet. And then it's a big change when you're out, either even in public here, or like you say, when you're big with a big family, you know, everybody's talking, there's a cacophony of sound happening. I get overwhelmed. Yeah. Yeah. So it's good to drive east and see the windmills and know that you're almost home.
Yes, that's for sure. Coming through the pass.
Well, I want to thank you for being here with me today. But before I let you go, I'm going to do what I do at the end of every episode, and that is draw some random questions for you to answer for Patreon supporters of the podcast. If you're listening and you're not familiar with Diary Unlocked, it is content available exclusively to Patreon subscribers of the podcast. If you're interested in becoming a patron of the podcast, you can go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and check out the Patreon option. The first question that Darlene will be asked is, what is something every woman should try in her lifetime? If there were an extra hour today, what would you do? What is your greatest extravagance? And what was the first paying job you ever had, and where was it? So if you want to hear Darlene's answers to those questions, again, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and become a patron of the podcast. Darlene Morris, thank you so much for being here today. We'll put your links to your website in the blog post, and people can go and take a look at your work as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Starting with a big thanks to Linda R. from Washington, D.C. I received a box of books and goods from Linda, and it left me pretty speechless when I opened it. In addition to a wood block carved with a Perry's Nolina, there was what I can only describe as an antique postcard and notepad made of yucca wood. The front of the notepad is decorated with a color drawing of a Joshua tree, and the postcard with yucca in the foreground and mountains in the aft. And the descriptor reads, "Yucca wood, brevivolia, wood of moods and legends, but especially one legend which tells us that whosoever contacts yucca will have good luck. May this inspiration of the ancients be twofold, bringing you peace of mind and blessings of divine influence." The books include Mary Austin's Land of Little Rain and Earth Horizon, a book called Purple Hummingbird by Claude Warren and Joan Schneider, which was published in 2017 and is about Elizabeth Campbell Crozier and her archaeological work here in the desert. And last, if you've been listening for a while, you may recall me reading excerpts of Elizabeth's book, The Desert Was Home, for episode 100. That book is a reference book in our local Joshua Tree library, which required the entire book be read in the library. While reading, I'd made notes about passages of interest, and then I went back and made photocopies of the passages so I could share them with you on the podcast. Now I can read the book whenever I want because Linda found one and gifted a copy of this book to me. If you've ever attempted to locate it online, you know how precious a gift this book is. So, Linda, thank you so much for these wonderful gifts. I really appreciate you, and I'm so grateful. Shout-outs this week to Lorraine T. for signing up to be a patron of the podcast. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast, Lorraine, and for all your hard work as a longtime member of MBCA, the Morongo Basin Conservation Association. And a shout out to Karen A. for signing up for the new episode newsletter. Karen, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Don't forget, everything in the Desert Lady Diaries merch shop is 15% off until tomorrow, April 21st at 5 p.m. Central. Shop at desertladydiaries.threadless.com. That's desertladydiaries.threadless.com. Thanks so much for listening.